Welcome to 28 Cents. I want to talk about the communications age. When I was growing up, we were told, my generation, Generation X, we were told we're going to be in the communications age. Well, that sounded kind of vague. I realized what the Industrial Revolution was and its importance. So what's this communications age? And basically referring to worldwide mass communications and how our lives would be really dependent on this, especially electronically, especially advent of the internet and all the other forms of communications that we have, tied completely into the topic of the First Amendment, being able to get ideas and knowledge across quickly, and now it's worldwide. So I was thinking, how does this relate to Scripture? And it relates to everything in Scripture, because once the world is in a unified voice against God or for God, as the Babylonians were standing apart from God, which you will read about Babylon in the end times, and the spirit of the human race being in one voice, being against God, the Lion of Judah, Jesus Christ, and how this is going to bring a war when he comes back. But what Christ, I always wondered what the exact nature of was the relationship between the scribes, because it was when Christ was dealing with the Jewish leaders, it was the scribes, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. So here's a little bit of what I found. Scribes in ancient Israel were learned men whose business was to study the law, transcribe it, and write commentaries on it. We can thank the Jewish scribes for preserving the Old Testament portion of our Bibles. They were widely respected by the community because of their knowledge, dedication, and outward appearance of law-keeping. The scribes went beyond interpretation of Scripture, however, and added many man-made traditions to what God had said. They became professionals at spelling out the letter of the law while ignoring the spirit behind it. For me, that's key. What Christ is all about isn't about the law. He's about why and our motives, in ignoring the spiritual and putting up this front, this phony virtue signaling, if you would like to call it, sense of morality, this outward appearance that they had. And then later, towards the end of Jesus' ministry, he thoroughly condemned the scribes for their hypocrisy. Matthew 23. They knew the law and they taught it to others, but they did not obey it, at least inwardly, which is everything. So you can see this in all its different forms. Like I always say, the First Amendment, which is our communication, we're allowed to communicate freely. If you get rid of that, you will get rid of the other amendments in our society. Of course, as was mentioned earlier, the internet is the biggest worldwide way of communications, mass communications, instantaneously. And how outlets like Google and Facebook and Twitter have attempted to squelch all this, if the government couldn't take complete control of the internet physically itself, at least these powerful entities would do their best to control the information. We always have to remember that God created with a word, and Satan was jealous of God and hated him, and he couldn't create with a word. The only thing he did was create lying out of words. This is the essence of communicating truth or not. I frequently post, and I will post today, a video that I had in college, a 10-minute video that I think every high school senior should watch, good luck with that in the public schools now. But one segment of it had to do with democracy versus a republic and why it's so important to know the difference. And here's just a small part, and this has to do with what's inferred by words and what they're trying to get across every time they talk about democracies and they don't mention what we have, because it ignores the rights of the people, and it leads to mob rules and oligarchies.
Many Americans would be surprised to learn that the word democracy does not appear in the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution, nor does it appear in any of the constitutions of the 50 states. The founders did everything they could to keep us from having a democracy. James Madison, rightly known as the father of the Constitution, wrote in essay number 10 of the Federalist Papers, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths." Alexander Hamilton agreed, and he stated, "We are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in despotism or in the extremes of democracy." Samuel Adams, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, stated, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself." The founders had good reason to look upon democracy with contempt, because they knew that the democracies in the early Greek city-states produced some of the wildest excesses of government imaginable. In every case, they ended up with mob rule, then anarchy, and finally tyranny under an oligarchy.
As I stated, I'll post this on my outlets, New Media, and in my regular posts on Facebook. That's why it's so important, the language and what they're trying to sell to people. The democratic means of electing officials is the only part of a democracy we have in our system. So we don't have mob rules. People in California can't speak for people in Ohio. People in Mahoning County can't speak for the people in Columbiana County. You don't want that. You want to divide power up to its least lethal elements. You start at the local level and you go all the way to the federal level. That's why this consolidation of power has been this co-opting of the language. Change the language, change the people, and just like in any kind of brainwashing or cult, you have to repeat this over and over and over again. And I found that most people under the age of 40 have no idea these concepts because they were never taught that by our public schools and especially in colleges. I went to a college that was started by military people back in the late 60s, and I finished my degree through an ABC program that was designed for deployed people. It's a nice campus. It's an actual campus, not just computers. But it was totally worth it, at least to do what Christ wants me to do with the messages of communicating. And that's because I have worked with journalists both in the military and outside, and I find that a lot of them are fantastic journalists, but they're horrible communicators, and that's because the foundation of what they believe has nothing to do with reality, rather this construct of based on ideas like selling the idea of a democracy, which ends up in mob rules, versus having a system that balances out power and divides it up, but it has to be maintained, and we've not done that. But I won't go on with this, just food for thought when you're hearing all the things, especially now with the war in Europe and all the other things happening in our country, this devastation of the economy, that just have as your foundation what Christ said, and it'll make you discerning when you hear all of these things, regardless of the outlet you choose to listen to. But looks like we're going to have 2 more days of winter, and then we're going to be on to spring for Monday. But food for thought, and you guys have yourself a good week.